All right. Good evening, everyone. The White House Correspondents Association dinner erupted in chaos.
President Trump is said to be unhappy with the regime's latest ceasefire.
It's a real danger. He could be getting a less than full picture of what's happening.
A perimeter is already moving when the first agent points south and breaks into a run. The suspect is still mobile, the crowd is still exposed, and every second now belongs to the response. This is how the incident began. Washington, D.C., White House Security Zone restricted Federal District, North and South pedestrian corridors affected local time. 14:17 Eastern Standard Time. A member of the outer protective screen turns his head toward a movement break in the pedestrian flow. One man is walking against the crowd line, shoulders tight, right arm held close to the torso, pace inconsistent. Two civilians alter course around him without making contact. That deviation triggers the first silent warning. At 0:11, the nearest agent changes angle instead of speed. He does not run yet. He moves to preserve visibility on the suspect's hands while keeping uninvolved civilians outside the direct line between them. Another agent mirrors left to prevent a turn into the heavier foot traffic lane. Bravo starts the perimeter shift. Uniformed personnel at the near barricade open a lateral gap and begin redirecting pedestrians away from the corridor without using alarm language. A vehicle checkpoint supervisor halts inbound movement. The scene narrows before the public understands why. 34 seconds into Phase 1, Delta reports that the suspect has not fixed on a single target. That matters. A targeted attack produces a different movement pattern. This man is scanning, adjusting, and testing the perimeter with his eyes. The response remains controlled because uncertainty is still high and the civilian density is still too high for a hard intercept. One bystander stops and turns back toward the suspect, likely to record video. Bravo cuts that line immediately. A uniformed officer extends an arm, pivots the bystander behind cover, and points east. No one shouts. The response depends on preventing crowd compression. At 1:02, Delta confirms a visual on the suspect's right hand. The object is partially obscured by clothing and body angle. The command channel upgrades the event from suspicious movement to active armed threat protocol. That upgrade changes posture across the entire zone. It does not change the rule that every action must protect the public first. At T110, the first hard command goes out on the radio net. Outer lanes closed, pedestrians diverted, mobile units hold distance until the suspect commits to a direction. Agents do not collapse inward at once. They stretch the scene first. That buys room. The room buys options. Alpha shifts from observation to contact posture. Two agents shorten distance from offset angles, not frontally. A third remains deeper to protect the rear of the formation from a sudden reversal or secondary actor. The suspect continues walking, then stops without warning. Every nearby civilian movement becomes a threat variable. Some people freeze. Some move toward cover. Some move toward the sound of authority. Charlie personnel begin pulling the nearest civilians behind fixed barriers and structural corners, prioritizing children, elderly pedestrians, and anyone trapped in open pavement. Delta reports the suspect is turning through a partial arc, scanning both the near fence line and the outer sidewalk. He is looking for pressure points, exits, and hesitation. What he sees instead is controlled spacing. No one presents a clean lane. No one crowds him into a panic spike. At 1:55, the command post rejects immediate physical contact for a second time. The reason is clear: 5 civilians remain inside the suspect's near radius, and one is moving unpredictably with a stroller. If an agent rushes now and the suspect reacts with a weapon discharge or random movement, those civilians sit inside the danger envelope. At 2:09, Bravo locks the westward route. Officers move portable barriers and service vehicles into positions that look improvised to the public but are deliberate in function. The suspect can still move. He cannot move cleanly. Every available path is now slower, tighter, and more visible. 58 seconds into Phase 2, Alpha requests a distraction window. Command denies noise-based diversion because it could spook the crowd and collapse control. Instead, Delta authorizes a visual pressure maneuver. 2 agents step just enough to force the suspect's attention onto trained personnel and away from the civilians being moved behind him. The suspect notices the perimeter shaping around him. That is the first clear inflection point. His head movement accelerates. His shoulders lift. His feet stop following a natural walking rhythm. The incident has now entered the segment where hesitation on either side can produce the first irreversible error. The suspect reaches under the front of his outer garment. Alpha does not wait for a full presentation. The lead contact agent issues the first audible command and steps laterally to keep the civilian lane off axis. A second agent aligns for a physical intercept if the suspect bolts instead of complying. Civilians nearest the scene finally understand the event. The crowd reaction is immediate and uneven. Some run. Some crouch. Some stop in place and look for instructions. Bravo's task becomes harder because panic moves faster than orders in open space. The suspect backs toward a fixed barrier and tries to use the crowd motion as concealment. Delta calls his position every second. Left foot planted. Right shoulder bladed. Hand still hidden. Head turning. Distance shrinking. Those updates matter because every responder outside the suspect's sightline now works off that cadence. Alpha lead closes one step and stops. He does not overrun the moment. He forces a decision. The suspect can surrender, flee into a sealed perimeter, or escalate into physical resistance. The spacing leaves no fourth option. At 2:56, the suspect turns and drives toward the narrower pedestrian break between a concrete planter and a security rail. Bravo had already marked that as the likely escape lane. 2 officers collapse it before he can pass through, forcing him back into the open. The containment geometry is now doing the work. Charlie reports 1 civilian down during the scramble, likely from a fall rather than direct contact. A medic moves in undercover, drags the civilian behind the barrier line, and begins a rapid assessment. No life-threatening injury appears. Medical lane remains available. 39 seconds into Phase 3, Delta warns that a second man has stopped 2 zones away and is repeatedly reaching into a backpack. The possibility of a second actor changes the scene immediately. Command splits attention without splitting discipline. 2 uniformed officers break to intercept the backpack subject while the primary contact element stays locked on the armed suspect. The backpack subject complies during contact and is separated without further incident. He is not linked to the primary suspect. The false second threat consumes resources for 19 seconds and confirms the worst condition in any public site response, multiple unknowns at the same time. At 3:31, Alpha gets the first clear visual on the suspect's weapon. It is real. The command net upgrades to armed suspect imminent threat posture. That update narrows the decision tree. From this point forward, the response window is measured not in minutes but in body movements. At 3:36, the air fills with overlapping transmissions. Field units, perimeter posts, vehicle control, medical support, and command all transmit inside the same short burst. For 4 seconds, no one owns the net. That is enough time to lose the scene. Shift Supervisor Mason takes control. He cuts all non-essential traffic, assigns Delta as the sole movement caller, and pushes every other unit to acknowledgement only. The effect is immediate. The radio stops sounding like panic and starts sounding like a sequence again. Alpha receives the clean update it needs. Suspect pinned against an open lane with no civilians remaining inside immediate reach. That is the first time the response can prioritize arrest mechanics over crowd rescue. The window is narrow and unstable. It exists only because Bravo finished the civilian separation in time. The suspect lifts the weapon hand higher but does not fully extend it. That ambiguity matters in real time. Responders do not get the luxury of freeze-frame analysis. They get fragments, motion, and fractions of seconds. Alpha lead initiates the compression move. 2 agents shorten distance together while a third holds the angle that prevents lateral breakout. No one stacks directly behind anyone else. No one creates a crossline. The suspect now faces controlled pressure from 3 directions and no viable exit corridor. The suspect hesitates. That hesitation is operational gold. It signals overload. It means the subject is processing too many threats, too little space, and too few options. Alpha acts before that overload converts into a desperate move. The arrest team commits. Alpha lead drives in on the suspect's weapon side while the second agent controls the shoulder line and the third attacks lower body balance. The collision is deliberate and short. They do not wrestle for dominance. They break structure first. The suspect goes half down and twists toward the open pavement, trying to spin out of the contact. The weapon hand stays live. That is the entire fight now. Everything else is noise. A 4th agent enters from the rear angle and pins the suspect's hips against the ground. The lead agent isolates the arm at the wrist and forearm. Another secures the upper back. The suspect still has partial movement, but not enough to regain his feet. Bravo expands the outer ring by another 10 meters. Civilians begin pressing phones upward from behind cover lines. Officers force them back again. The incident is no longer only a threat scene. It is becoming an evidence scene. Charlie stages forward but does not break the control envelope. The medical team does not touch the suspect or arrest team until the weapon is separated, the hands are secured, and the scene commander confirms no secondary device indicators are visible. Sequence matters because premature treatment can reopen risk. 17 seconds into Phase 5, Alpha secures the suspect's weapon arm to the pavement. 1 agent calls hand over the radio. Another is called control. A third is called cuffing. The language is clipped because clarity outranks volume. At 4:44, the first wrist is secured. At 4:47, the second follows. At 4:49, the suspect's lower body stops active resistance. The fight is effectively over before most of the surrounding crowd fully sees it. Delta confirms no additional armed actors inside the immediate security zone. That confirmation permits the next transition, from force control to search, identification, and medical evaluation. The arrest is not complete until the uncertainty is gone. A woman breaks from the rear crowd line and runs toward the arrest point, shouting for someone still unaccounted for. That movement creates instant risk. One uncontrolled civilian inside a takedown zone can trigger misidentification, panic, or accidental contact with evidence. At 5:03, Officer Ramirez moves without waiting for a second order. He intercepts at the shoulder line, turns her 90 degrees off the lane, and transfers her to Charlie personnel behind hard cover. He does not let the arrest team divide attention. That preserves the control bubble at the exact point where scenes often fracture. Charlie assigns one medic and one officer to witness reconciliation. They identify the family member within seconds behind the second barrier line. The woman is not injured. She is separated from the hot zone and remains under observation. Delta marks the lane clear again. That matters because evidence recovery begins now. The suspect's path, dropped items, footwear marks, and bystander recordings will all matter later. A clean scene is part of the response, not an afterthought after it. Alpha conducts the first suspect search. The search is methodical. Waistband, pockets, rear line, ankle area, outer garment, immediate ground radius. Each stage is announced. Each stage is confirmed. Bravo extends the perimeter one more layer to protect investigators and prevent contamination. The crowd no longer behaves like a crowd under threat. It behaves like a crowd after a threat. That creates a different problem. People want proximity, footage, and explanation. At 5:40, Charlie reaches the suspect for injury assessment. The suspect is conscious, restrained, breathing without visible airway compromise, and showing signs of exertion from the physical struggle. Agents from Alpha remain attached during the exam. Medical care does not suspend custody. At 5:49, a second medic checks the fallen civilian from earlier. Minor impact trauma. No penetrating injury. No evidence of direct contact with the suspect. The civilian is stabilized in place and then moved for formal evaluation. Command orders a controlled witness hold in the nearest secure area. Not everyone gets detained. Not everyone gets released. Responders sort by relevance, immediate eyewitnesses, direct proximity civilians, video holders, and those who only observe the aftermath. At 6:08, Delta begins the first concise scene summary for senior command. One suspect. One weapon was recovered. No confirmed secondary actor. No confirmed explosive device. Civilian movement controlled. Outer perimeter holding. That summary is short because senior decisions depend on speed more than detail in the first minutes. Investigators enter the inner ring. Protective response does not hand over the scene all at once. It is handed over in layers. Threat management stays in place until identification and clearance reach threshold. Bravo reports traffic restrictions expanding around the zone. Vehicle reroutes are now active beyond the initial barriers. What began as a small tactical incident now produces city-scale friction. That is standard near a federal protection site. One man with one weapon can move an entire district. Alpha rotates personnel. The agents who made first contact are not removed from the scene, but command reduces their immediate physical tasks where possible. Adrenaline affects reporting. Structured turnover protects accuracy. At 7:02, the suspect is moved from ground restraint to controlled seated posture for transport preparation. Two agents maintain upper body control. One officer documents visible injuries. Another logs the recovery location of the weapon and any related articles. A photographer begins the first official visual record of the scene before movement disturbs placement. The public will later see only fragments. The case file must preserve sequence. Sequence is what survives rumor. The weapon is packaged under chain of custody control. Nearby ground items are marked. Responders do not assume every object belongs to the suspect. In a public space incident, scene clutter is always higher and attribution is always slower. Command receives confirmation that no protected movement was compromised during the incident window. That fact will shape the public explanation later. It will not change the internal review, which will still measure how close the suspect came to forcing lethal escalation. Delta relays the final all clear for immediate armed threat. That does not end the operation. It ends the first layer of uncertainty. Investigators now have their own motive. Analysts will have their own pattern. Prosecutors will own the rest. At 8:11, Charlie completes the medical status board. No responder with life-threatening injury. No civilian with life-threatening injury. Suspect stable for transport. This is the point where a successful response becomes statistically visible. Danger contained, casualties minimized, control retained. Witness extraction begins. Civilians closest to the event are moved in short groups for statements. Officers note not just what they saw, but where they stood, when they moved, and whether they recorded any footage. In public space incidents, timelines are built from people as much as cameras. The suspect is lifted to his feet and transferred to a transport posture. He does not control the pace. He does not control the route. He exits the scene through a lane that did not exist 8 minutes earlier at AT 9:03. Command conducts the first standing review beside the outer barrier. The review is not about heroics. It is about sequence failure points, timing, visibility, and whether any split-second decision increased unnecessary risk. Every major protective response begins learning before the asphalt cools. 3 facts define the outcome. The suspect never achieved clean access to a protected target. Civilians never became trapped in a static kill zone. The arrest team closed the event before panic outran control. At 9:34, the same review flags the weak points. Radio congestion at 3:36. Civilian reentry at 5:02. Initial uncertainty around the suspect's hand position and weapon presentation. Those points will drive changes in future drills, lane control, and transmission discipline. At 9:51, perimeter personnel begin the long process of returning the district to controlled normal movement. Roads do not reopen because the arrest happened. Roads reopen when investigators, protective planners, and command all sign off that the site has been reduced from incident scene to monitored area. At the suspect transport departs. The arrest now moves from the security zone into the legal chain. The physical struggle ends on the pavement. The institutional response does not. The suspect reaches the secured processing location. He remains conscious, restrained, and medically stable. 1 recovered weapon is logged into evidence intake. All responding personnel required for immediate statements are identified before they leave the operational chain. The last directly affected civilians clear the witness hold area. 1 receives further evaluation for minor fall-related injury. Others are released after preliminary statements and evidence collection checks. No hostage recovery phase exists because the event never hardened into a barricade or seizure. At 10:44, the inner security lane near the arrest point remains sealed for evidence work. The outer lane begins phased reopening under visible law enforcement presence. The public sees motion returning. The responders see a scene still active in layers. Charlie closes its emergency medical posture and reverts to standby coverage. Bravo maintains an expanded standoff until command orders drawdown. Alpha personnel complete immediate reporting with times, movement descriptions, and force details. Delta finalizes the incident timeline for senior protective leadership. At 11:12, extraction is complete in the only form that matters here: civilians alive, suspect in custody, security zone intact, evidence preserved, and command continuity maintained from first detection through arrest and transfer. The suspect appeared to believe movement, crowd density, and proximity to a symbolic target would fracture the response window and create confusion long enough to force advantage. That did not happen. Protective personnel shaped distance, denied clean movement, stripped the suspect of civilian cover, and ended the event through coordinated control rather than uncontrolled escalation. The gap was procedural. The suspect acted alone inside public space. The response operated as a layered system already built for uncertainty. To T-1928 Zulu, the incident ended where federal protection doctrine is designed to end, inside the perimeter, under control, before the target was ever reached.